Check, check, 1, 2, 3. Check, check, 1, 2, 3. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining me for this week's edition of the SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup. My name is Marty Bennett, and over the next half hour, we're going to be going through some of the top stories of the week and how those different stories have coalesced into a series of questions that we ask each week on the Midweek Roundup. For those that are new to the Roundup, we take our news stories from our SMIE Consulting All the SMIE News Fit to Share, and that comes out on Mondays at 9 a.m. Eastern. And you can subscribe to that a couple different ways, and I'll be dropping the links to those in our chat. So do stay with me as we cover those three questions. The questions are also on the screen if you're watching live. You can also watch on repeat on our YouTube channel as well. So I'll pop up those three questions into the chat for you today. They are, first, how important are international career services on campus? Second, which company is talking out of both sides of its mouth on Russia? And finally, what does globalization mean at your college? And does it include DEI objectives? So we'll get through those three questions and more on this week's SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup. For those that are listening on the podcast, we really appreciate your sticking with us and subscribing. We're closing in on 200 episodes, which will happen sometime later this summer. We're on episode 192 now. We've had some great episodes over the years, and wouldn't be the same without your subscribing on the podcast feed or watching us live on Facebook and now LinkedIn, Twitter, or YouTube as well. So it's my great pleasure to be with you again today. We're going to be taking a look at all three of these questions here in just a moment, so we appreciate you being with us today. What we're going to start with is this question. We've had covered parts of this before as we've had news stories pop into our feeds on the various topics of the day that our newsletter covers, but we'll be talking about this perspective from the point of a couple different avenues. First, we look at it from the international student perspective and some stories that Karen Fisher in her Latitudes newsletter last week covered with a junior business finance major, Anson Tan, getting an internship request or offer from a major airline. He was ecstatic. He might be able to make it for this really important position. But his new employer sent over the offer letter. There wasn't any mention in the paperwork about his student visa status. And he's from Singapore, so they're not allowed to work or do internships in the United States, only under narrow conditions. Obviously, if this is a CPT while he's still enrolled, or that would be work related to their major, he would be able to do it, and the international office would issue an I-20 specifically for CPT, but he decided that his job offer was rescinded. So he said that he disclosed his visa status to recruiters during the interview process, but when he raised that issue, he was then had his offer rescinded. So partly due to a lack of understanding on the company's behalf, which is surprising for a major international airline, but also surprising that not knowing the specifics, if he did have his I-20 signed by his DSO that allowed him and had authorization for him to work in an internship at that company. That certainly speaks to a lot of would legally solve the majority of the issues there. So I'm curious there's more to that story, obviously, so Karen doesn't report on those specific details. But really, the workplace piece of the college experience, in terms of it's limited for international students to on-campus work while they're enrolled or post-completion optional practical training time, that year to 3 years, depending on their major that they have available to them. Or if they're lucky, a CPT opportunity if their major requires it, or if it's available, depending on your institution. If an internship's available, oftentimes students can take advantage of those. So it's really important to I think, as you talk about the issues involved for international students when it comes to work in the United States, there are significant differences. And obviously the international student offices know, and most institutions, if you've got significant numbers, you've had conversations, I hope, with your career services office when they handle employment offices or student employment offices in terms of what's possible. The on-campus work is pretty much a no-brainer as long as it's not a federal work-study job. There are usually not restrictions on whether an international student can take a job or not on campus. But for these before graduation work opportunities, during break periods, or even during the semester, if it's part of the curriculum, the curricular opportunities can really add value for that student in terms of their opportunities to build their resume up and get some practical experience before they graduate and decide whether they really want to work in that particular industry or that particular company. So what is tricky, though, is you have some missteps along the way here with whether that was on the institutional end or on the employer end, some of which on the employer end, they can be out of the control of the individual student and even the individual institution that is responsible or connecting that student with the opportunity. But I will say, this is something that I think a lot of institutions really don't do well, and that is provide the customized level of service that international students truly need to succeed, not just be an afterthought for a lot of career services offices. And I talk about a couple different things here. When international students are applying for jobs, or most campuses have job fairs, internship fairs on campus, how difficult would it be to require when employers are signing up for spaces to tick off, will you accept international students with verified curricular practical training authorization to work at an internship, for example, if it's an internship fair, or if it's a post-completion OPT opportunity for graduating students. Will that be part of the equation too? Will you accept an international student who has a legal right to work for between 1 and 3 years, depending on the major, and or would you be willing to sponsor students? Do you sponsor F1 students for H1B employee visas down the road? So providing that information minimally is what institutions should be doing for international students when they're coming for fairs, internship fairs, job fairs. Why is that important? Because it shows that you actually acknowledge that they have different needs and different requirements than the rest of the student body. There are obviously other groups that will have different requirements as well, but certainly with international students, that has to be a known quantity, known facts in the career services offices, and there has to be coordination to make sure that students, international offices, career services offices are all on the same page when it comes to what those opportunities are and what is possible and what is not possible. So those are some basic things. But it's also about, when you think about what career services is, it's helping find jobs for students after they graduate, right? And getting them prepared for that, learning how to write a resume, learning how to prepare for an interview, working on your communication skills that might need freshening up, how to present yourself for an interview. All of those kinds of things are key. What is also important for international students is, hey, they might not be looking to stay in the United States. You might have the majority of your international students wanting to go back home and find jobs in their field, in their countries. Is your institution equipped for that? I would say, unless your institution has a well-developed international network, that's an afterthought for your career services offices. Where unless there's a well-developed alumni structure that they get plugged into before they graduate and that they can connect to an international network of alumni from your institution to potentially find jobs in your field, unless that already exists, there might not be anything internationally that your career services office can direct them to and help them find work in their home country. And when outcomes are so important to the why students choose the institutions that they choose, and when your institution is not providing that level of support, it's a missed opportunity, and it's a chance for you to lose students on the front end and potentially have leave a sour taste in students' mouths on the back end if they don't get any support if they're looking for work opportunities back home. Are there things out there that you can leverage to improve their chances of getting the support that they need to find either domestic jobs in the U.S. or back home overseas? That might be a next level thing, but it's certainly something to start thinking about and planning for. Because it might be time and there might be some expense involved, so you need to really pay attention to these items as you're developing plans for your international students and customizing that journey for them, because that is not an easy task, and it requires some specific attention. What I will say on this related front to this, there's Karen Fisher's story that had some interesting student takes on this, but you also have the employer story. And right now, employers in the United States are gung-ho on hiring international students or international potential employees. Over the last 2-3 years, you've seen a definite increase. So in 2021, for example, 82% of employers said their sponsorship levels met expectations or were higher than projected compared to their expectations at the beginning of the year related to sponsoring students or sponsoring H-1B visas, for example. However, they face challenges attracting and retaining foreign talent due to the visa caps and declining levels of enrollment in U.S. colleges and universities. So the same group was surveyed what their plans are for next year. 82% again of employers expect their foreign national headcount to increase or stay the same. So employers are certainly not giving up on internationals for potential jobs in their companies. So I think there's a lot of pull factors that are going to keep students here that want to. If we can connect the dots appropriately with the right companies that are eager to employ internationals, that are campuses that are aware of these opportunities and pre-screen those employers so that they can have that information available to share with students so that they don't waste their time at a job fair with 1,000 employers speaking to 900 that don't have or don't provide jobs to international students, even though they're eligible to work for 1 to 3 years without anything on the company's behalf that they have to do. There are Fortune 500 companies that will not hire international students, and that's a real sad fact. I'm in a town that has a Fortune 500 company, company headquarters here, and these are conversations I've had with their HR department for several years, is how can you not hire international students for internships or even jobs after graduation, some of which you could have for 3 years, and really get a sense of whether they're an employee that you want to keep. And if they are, the costs are in the big scope of things, $3,000 to $5,000. You can get that. That's a cost of doing business, frankly, if you have a talent, an international student talent that wants to work for you. Why wouldn't you want to keep them? But some companies, like this one in town, they won't even go that far to take that risk because they say we're not going to invest in our time and effort in students that may or potential employees that may not be able to stay in the country. So really sad in the realities in terms of what's happening in the marketplace. Part of what needs to happen more is career services offices need to be more proactive in terms of discussing what international students' legal rights are in terms of work opportunity during their studies and then after they're done. And the more that's articulated to potential employers that are coming. Obviously, career services offices focus a lot of their time and attention on what the students get and get prepared for. But maybe they should be doing those kind of workshops that are international specific for those employers that are wanting to participate in your internship and job fairs on campus. So there are a couple different levels where this is, I think, of real value to international offices on campus that are trying to promote their institutions as favorable destinations for international students. And the more that you are connecting all the dots throughout your international student journey, particularly focusing on that career services piece into alumni status, the more you are going to be presenting real full-service international student journey that is really geared to them at every stage of their enrollment process as a student. So that's topic number one. Let's move right on into topic two, and this is the bad actors story that I haven't been wanting to cover. I know there are many of my colleagues in international ed that have been carrying the flag for this fight for Ukrainian institutions, for Ukraine as a country, for Ukrainian students, and that has to do with how some in the international ed community have and are dealing with what's happening in Russia, and that may be because of investments in Russia, maybe because of relationships with particular institutions, maybe a number of different things. But the question is, which company is talking out of both sides of its mouth on Russia? An article appeared in past week's Inside Higher Ed, where QS, one of the major world ranking companies out there, had said that right after the invasion, they pledged not to rank Russia's universities. And one of the reasons, for those who have been following what's happened in Russia, you know that there's been basically an information shutdown. It's one way or the highway for anyone in Russia that wants to speak their mind. And certainly universities have been made to toe the line. And all the rectors at institutions in Russia were forced to sign on to a document that said that they support Vladimir Putin's special military operation in Ukraine. And that there are a number of Russian institutions, at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in the top 800 or so. 5 Russian institutions, so not a huge number, but that 5, maybe that's more of a sign of the quality of Russian higher education, but that's only 5 Russian institutions are in the top 800 of the QS report rankings. But you see, and all 5 of their institutions were made to sign on to this pledge that they support the Putin's invasion. War in Ukraine, we'll say it here. What they had said at the outset is at QS, we are united in outrage at the war in Russia, at the war Russia is waging against the Ukrainian people. We believe in the power of international education to promote understanding and collaboration. Yet we have seen images of university campuses indiscriminately attacked and our partners, colleagues, and friends displaced in this humanitarian catastrophe. That statement was removed from the QS website and is available only, as above, through the Wayback Machine, an archive of old internet pages. That's a line from the Inside Higher Ed story. On April 4th, QS posted a new version of that statement, which still had much of the same language, but no longer included the statement on redacting Russian universities. So there's obviously surprise in the international ed community and that they're still ranking these. Times Higher Ed, for example, another major world ranking group, said in March that they would not be ranking Russian universities, and they have abided by that. So that they have taken steps to ensure, the Times Higher Ed folks have taken steps to ensure that Russian universities are given less prominence in the rankings and their university profiles are not available. So that's Times Higher Ed story. So that is how they have felt there's a way to respond, Times Higher Ed, I should say, not QS. QS have basically said one thing, gone back on it, and are now doing exactly the opposite by continuing to rank the Russian institutions. Despite their rectors fully supporting the war in Ukraine, and despite crackdowns on free speech on their campuses being the rule of the day, that protesters that speak against or create fake news saying that Russia actually invaded Ukraine, it can get 5 years in prison as a result, or longer depending on the severity of the supposed crime. So this is something that it really bugs me. It bugs me as an international educator who tries to have as much as possible walk the walk, walk the talk that he talks about related to international education and having standards, having a sense of outrage, moral outrage when things like this, what's happened in the Ukraine, happen. And even had a colleague at NAFSA who has family members from both sides. She was born in Russia but lived in, her husband's from Ukraine. She mentioned that there are two sides to this story. And yeah, it's the two, but she said she actually believed, and this is a well-educated person at an institution in the U.S., that she believed that Russia hadn't committed atrocities necessarily, and that it was a special military operation, and that her family in Russia believed that as well. Well, we know that that's the case because they only get that line; they don't get the other side of the story. So it's a war that is Ukraine did not bring on itself. It's a war that Russia has committed and failed in a lot of different ways. They've had some successes recently in the East, but their poor planning, poor logistics, and other failings have laid bare a lot of the Cold War hype that there was nothing really there, or it was maybe 30 years ago, but isn't anymore. And that's something that why institutions in the United States haven't gone more fully against, come out against Russian institutions or cutting ties with Russian institutions, as MIT did shortly after the war began. You saw the U.S. government this past week talk about cutting ties on research in the scientific community, recommending that others do it, but not mandating, but leaving it to individual institutions to assess the situation, decide what they need to do. So this is really something that it really gets me when companies do this, and I'm certainly not a fan of QS at this point, based on their handling of the situation, and not standing up for what's right. And by not doing that, it would be very hard for me to justify any relationship with them if I were an institution. So, based on that standard, that's their own words. So let's move on to the third question, which is, what does globalization mean at your college? Now, this is something that I think we've seen a lot of. There's an article then what prompted this question, an article this past week in the Pi News that said some international ed leaders say globalization is a strategic priority. 78% of leaders in international ed believe globalization is a strategic priority, according to a new report by Teradata. So Teradata, as you know, is one of the been on the study abroad side for many years and has their own CRM, basically, that institutions can use to manage both current students going abroad and international students coming in. So this is interesting. The survey results were interesting in that that talked about student interest as well in international programming. 72% were indicating a strong desire to study abroad. Participants cited language learning and career prep at 30% and 24% as the two primary reasons for wanting to study abroad. And that in many, for the Teradata folks, having endured 2 years of basically no study abroad or very minimal, mostly virtual exchanges, you now see, in his words, this is the CEO of Teradata, Anthony Rotali, is saying that demand is now exceeding pre-pandemic levels for study abroad. So in terms of what that means, well, when he says globalization, global engagement is accelerating its evolution, in his words. And that the future really, in his words also, from the survey I should say, 45% believe global engagement to be tied to the reputation of the organization or institution. So that is leveraging that in what you do internationally and how much you do is important. And they asked, international ed leaders were asked about what the biggest challenges they face currently in the field are. So we should point out that this 78% is a survey of international educators, so not necessarily university leaders. So there may be some disconnects, as there often are, between international offices and university leadership, senior leadership, if they don't have a prominent seat at the table. But that at least is encouraging. That you would hope that 78% would say that their institutions have globalization as a priority, because they're obviously funding their offices and they're investing in both international enrollments as well as expanding study abroad and curriculum internationalization and faculty and student exchanges, all of that. So what I think what you see is that there are moves at institutions toward no longer siloing international admissions and international and study abroad or international ed departments, that they are becoming more into more combined units. I know at one of the institutions I'm working for actually, we've created a new unit to be the umbrella for all international initiatives, even potentially, so it's hopefully going to be including English language, study abroad, international missions at the undergraduate and graduate level, and partnerships, as well as hopefully career services will be in there in that sphere as well. So a lot of positives, I think, out of this article in terms of what the survey results are. What I would say is that we do see, and one of the reasons I focused on this topic today is that what is included when we talk about globalization. And one of the points here is that we see in one of the major driving forces on university campuses these days is about DEI. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. And there are now senior vice presidents or vice provosts of diversity, or vice presidents of diversity DEI initiatives on many college campuses. And that is something that I think we're looking at what the future might hold there. What we do see is that, and one of the reasons I focused on this issue is what is included in globalization, is asking the question, how is DEI and international connected on your campus? So that part of the survey that was entitled "The State of Globalization in Higher Ed" also connected globalization efforts to DEI inclusion initiatives. So the report I'll be putting a link to as well in the ebook that Teradata is providing. There's some really some solid data in there. But what I think is important to keep in mind with this is, and why DEI is important and why international should be a component of DEI, and because it works both ways. It's not only on the study abroad side, having more students of color have opportunities to study abroad, have the funding to make it happen, and have the paths made clear for them to study abroad. And there are a lot of different levels to that question and for DEI. But we also see on the inbound side, we see that a lot of times the international students, and a good colleague and friend of mine, Rajika Bandari, has just authored her own book, America Calling. And that's in her book. She talks specifically about this. We just had we're on a board of directors together, and we just had a book signing event for her where she was taking questions from the audience, and someone had asked about DEI and international education. And she made the clear connection between her experiences as an international student, as a group in the United States, or certainly a minority group, certainly are don't have full range of benefits available that domestic students have, that they oftentimes are, excuse me, can be ghettoized on their campus, depending on the countries that they're coming from and the nature of the campus communities, that they often can be targets. We've seen that post 9/11 with Muslim males in the United States, even Sikhs that were targeted for abuse as potential terrorists. We've seen in the last, and during COVID, we saw Asian Americans and international students from China, especially, and from all over East Asia, be targeted as well. So they're oftentimes at risk. So doing what we can to support them and include them under the umbrella of giving our international students the same equity and access to university resources is I think, a really important connection that international offices can and should be making on their campuses, and making sure that they're included in those initiatives. So that is what we have for you today on the Roundup. We really appreciate you being with us for this 192nd edition of the Midweek Roundup. We will be going into some more depth on a lot of these issues in the months to come, but we're appreciative of you taking the time out of your Wednesday to watch us live, but also those that are watching on repeat on our various social media channels. So thanks so much, and do have a good rest of your day.